So today I'm going to show you how I shot this short film all by myself without any expensive equipment. So first, let's break down the goal behind this video and kind of what I was trying to portray and kind of put together as I shot this. So I was building this old espresso machine, and it's got a very classic, old school look to it. It's from Italy, so these are all things that I wanted to kind of incorporate in. So I wanted to keep it very simple, old school, to kind of give it a slower, methodical, more mechanical feel to it. So now you know kind of the goal behind it. So let's talk about each individual section. So we're going to break down lighting, we're going to break down lenses, we're going to break down how I shot it and how I kind of pulled off certain looks, and then a few tips and tricks I did in post to bring a little bit more life and excitement and movement, engagement to this piece. So first, lighting. I shot this entire thing with a single light. So if you count the workbench key light, then it's technically 2 lights. And I could have strictly shot it with that alone, but I wanted to give it a little bit more depth, a little bit more contrast, and add some different effects to it, so I incorporated one other small light. So that workbench light is very yellow. It's got a high temperature to it, and then that back wall is also got a yellow tint to it. So already the temperature is extremely high on that, so I'm gonna have to compensate on white balance and kind of work with my color grading to kind of tone that down a bit. I did want to keep it a very warm feel to it, but not quite the extent that I was getting because of all that high temp stuff going on. So now remember, the subject of this is a chrome plated espresso machine. So you're gonna get a lot of reflection, a lot of glare, a lot of hot spots in your highlights. So I wanted to try and control that as much as I could in that small little space. So for that workbench light, I ended up putting some wax paper that I just got out of the kitchen. Whatever you use for baking cookies or anything like that works perfectly. So that acted as a kind of diffuser to kind of drop the highlights and kind of diffuse that light, make it a little bit softer, easier to recover those highlights in the workbench with that specific light. Now, I'm sure a lot of you probably caught onto this, but if you didn't, there isn't actually a window that reflects onto that workbench. I wanted to give kind of a late night vibe to it, that I was coming in late night to work on this. And then as you could see in the end, I don't know if you heard, you could hear the morning birds, things like that. The color temperature changed a bit. So we kind of transitioned from late night into early morning, where, you know, of course I had a nice tasty espresso from that machine. So in order to get that window feel in this garage where I really don't have a window or a street light kind of popping in through that window, what I did first, I used this. So I got this idea from DSLR Video Shooter. He's done this and he shows you a few tips and tricks on doing it, so I won't go into vast detail with it. Basically, this is just a cheap $15, $20 mirror I got off Amazon. I used some gaff tape to kind of create a grid on it, so it looks like a window somewhat. I mean, I could have done a better job, but when you shoot light off this, it looks like a window on the back wall. All I did was just mount a plate to the back of it so that I can strap it in with a super clamp, and then that is my window. This is the Ninja Light 200. This is a fantastic, powerful, very capable little light. I love how small and compact it is. It enables me to kind of put it in tight spaces, especially in this garage. I don't really have a lot of space to work with. So having something compact and small like this that I can pop in little spots and hide and kind of use very strategically is fantastic. So this is a bicolor LED light. The kit I have comes with a remote. It comes with a Bowens adapter because this is not a Bowens mount. This is a proprietary mount by Light. And then I put a snoot on the end of this to kind of really control and focus that light in. And I've just pointed that at the mirror and made sure it's reflected right onto that back wall. This also comes with a plate you can attach on here, so you can power it by the Sony NPF batteries, or you can plug it in with a cable, which is usually what I do in here just because it's easier than worrying about 50 different batteries. So I love that I can kind of do both. Also, this plugs in with the app that I have for those other little, these bad boys. These RB9s by Light as well. So I can tie all these into the same app and run them simultaneously from my phone instantly, which is fantastic. Now, since this is a bicolor light and it has some special effects, you'll notice that I kind of use that throughout the film. In the beginning, you can see it's a very cool, very blue feel to it, a very cold feel to it because of course it's late night and I wanted to give that street light, very dark, late night vibe to it. At the end, you'll notice that it is very warm. It is very yellow, very bright, very saturated because, you know, the sun comes up and all that stuff and shining through that same window as the time has transitioned. I'm not sure if you noticed as well, but the close-up shot of the pressure gauge, you can see the temperature kind of go from a very blue to a very yellow-orange saturated look. That was kind of my way of showing the transition from late night till early morning as I'm finishing up building this machine. And I was able to do that all from my phone, so I can just change the temperature and start it off very blue and pump it up to really orange all at once to kind of get that smooth transition into it. Lastly, for special effects, again, I'm using my phone, so the shot behind me that was kind of lightning in the middle of the night, I was able to just control that from my phone, switch the special effects, and then switch it back off, and then that kind of added to the feel and the vibe for it, and enabled me to create some more engagement with this. So again, with lighting, I wanted to create some separation. So I could have just used the standard work light that's over the bench, but because I wanted to create some separation and different effects, because of the positioning I had that light in, I was able to create a nice side light with that blue because of where the light was. I had it set up over here, and I had the mirror back in this area, so that light is going to bounce off that mirror and then come behind me and hit the wall. So because of the angle, I'm getting a little bit of side light with that blue, which was nice. I'm also getting rim light along here because it's bouncing from behind me and coming up this way. And then also I do get a little bit of fill light as well. Because I'm about 1.5 feet, 2 feet from the wall, and that wall is a lighter yellow color, I'm getting a little bit of fill from the light bouncing off of that and up towards my face. If I needed to, I could have put a blank card there, such as just some white poster board or something, to give me a little bit more bounce from the overhead as well as that light to kind of fill the eyes a little bit more, which would have been great, but I really didn't think I needed that, and I didn't want it too bright, so I decided not to use that. Full disclosure, they did send me that light to use. All right, for the rig that we used, I shot this all with the Fuji XT4. This is my little setup that I used for this specific shoot. So we have a shotgun mic on here just because I want to make sure I get all those natural noises from working on the machine so I can have those as backups in case I don't want to add something else. Of course, I have my handle, I got a tripod mount, I have a focus pull here just to kind of make it easier with this setup. So with all the lenses that I use, which we'll talk about next, I use the Freewell CPL filter. Again, because we're shooting something that's very reflective and bright, I want to control that as much as possible. So using that CPL filter lets me kind of bring those highlights down just a little bit more to give me a little bit control and kind of reduce those hot spots. Now, one more thing on this rig that isn't kind of budget friendly, but if you have or if you want to upgrade to, this kind of helps speed up the process a lot, is this HDMI transmitter. I love this thing. I've used this on a lot of professional shoots and then also personal projects as well. I use it in the studio all the time for our overhead fly-in shot as well. It's great. It plugs right into our switcher. We use that all over there at the time. So this lets me get a wireless signal to an external monitor. So with that on there, I have it hooked up simply to this small HD with a HDMI cable in, and this is my viewing external monitor. This allows me to put this on that workbench, and I can set up the camera wherever it is, and I can look right here and see the shot and make sure that it's looking good, the focus is right, everything like that, and then I can go back and make adjustments if I need to. Now, if you're on a budget, yes, a lot of cameras nowadays have apps where you can kind of control that. You can record, start, stop, all that kind of stuff from the phone. The Fuji I have does do that, but it's kind of finicky, and after a little while you'll lose connection, or if your phone goes to sleep, you'll lose the connection that way, or if you have to make adjustments, it's not as reliable, and it can take more time connecting and disconnecting and reconnecting whenever you're switching lenses or moving positions or you accidentally hit a button. It just becomes a big time consumption. So for me, I didn't want to do that. I'm trying to keep the production time of this to a minimum since it already took forever. The last thing I'll say about these HDMI transmitters is they really are great. I use them in my freelance work as well. You can connect these to either an external monitor or you can log in with your phone and view what's going on as well. So if I have a client who wants to see what I'm shooting on the main camera, all they have to do is download the app and they can plug straight into this transmitter and see exactly what the shot looks like. The one downside and issue I have with it is that you can only view one camera as of now per receiver. So what I mean is a lot of times you're shooting with multiple cameras, and so you have several different cameras. It would be nice to have multiple transmitters on those cameras and to be able to hook them up to one receiver or be able to switch between cameras on the app as opposed to being stuck viewing just one angle. Another thing you can do if you have more room in your budget is get something like the Nucleus, which is a wireless focus pull. That would allow you to hook that up to that same monitor and have the other side on the camera, so you could position yourself where you need to be, have the camera where it needs to be, and you can pull focus remotely to make sure it's spot on instead of having to go back and forth and guess. So now let's talk about the lenses that I decided to use for this. So the original plan was to just use two lenses, a 50mm and then my macro 50mm. So after getting set up and kind of assessing the situation and figuring out what shots I wanted to take along the way, I was not able to get wider shots that I wanted facing me because of where the bench is located. Now normally you would pull that out and give you more depth, but because that bench is tucked away into the corner, I don't have the luxury of being able to pull it out and push back in or put it in the center of a room where I can create that depth using distance instead of lenses. So because of that reason, I had to use a third lens as well. So for all my tighter shots, I use the vintage Nikkor 50mm 3.5 lens. Especially for this video, I didn't want that super sharp, crisp look because, you know, we're going for the more aged kind of vintage look to it. So for the wide shots, I ended up using the Super Takumar 28mm 3.5 lens. If I were to go back, I probably would have used a Nikon vintage 24 or 28mm lens. But it was there and I just decided to use it. Great lens, it just would have been kind of nice to use all Nikon glass for this, but I use that 28 as my wide shot to get behind the espresso machine and everything like that. Also, what's great about this lens is it has a 1.3 foot focusing distance, which is about the distance I had between the espresso machine and the wall, so that was nice. So that brings me to the final lens, and the key lens I wanted to use for the vast majority of my shots, which is this vintage Nikon 50mm 1.2. This is what I used for as many shots as I could. I shot a lot wide open, but also stopped it down to about f2, just depending on the shot and the look that I wanted to go and the lighting and stuff. I wanted to keep it closer to wide open, just because I wanted that more hazy, not so super focused look to it. And then I kind of stopped it down for some other shots, just to kind of give me a good mix. Again, this is a budget film, so the vintage macro Nikon 3.5, excuse me. I haven't checked in a while, but last time I checked it was about 50 bucks. The Super Takumar 28mm probably goes for closer to 60 to 70, the 3.5. So you have those two there. Now this is the one exception. This lens, it's a little bit more sought after, so this one goes for about $300 to $400, the 55 1.2. Now you don't have to use this. I could have used a different vintage Nikkor 50 1.4, and that would have brought the price down substantially. Those go for about 50, 60 bucks. But I specifically wanted to use this lens because I just love the look of it, and I just wanted to test it out for the scenario and see how it worked. So that is the lens I went with. So if you go for the cheaper Nikon 50mm 1.0 lens, lens-wise, I'm looking at about $150. So for this, I use the Fuji to Canon adapter, and then I use Canon adapters for all the lenses. So I use the Nikkor to Canon and then put the Canon on here. And of course for the Takumar, I use the Fuji to Canon and then a M42 to Canon EF mount. So lastly, there's two things I did post-edit to give this film a little bit more life, a little bit more movement, and create a little bit more engagement. Now remember, I shot everything on a tripod. I didn't have anybody helping me the entire way, so I had to position it, take the shot, and move on back and forth the whole way through. It took me probably a couple weeks to nail everything down, just because it's just a slow process when you're building something and trying to document every single shot with 2 or 3 different angles to make sure you have what you need. So there's 2 simple tricks that I used to kind of give this a little bit more life. So since I'm shooting this in 4K, I can punch in about 5%. That gives me a little bit of play on either side. Then all I do is simply move my image over, and then as I start the playback, I just move it and let it slide over just ever so slightly to create almost a pan kind of slider effect to it. The trick with this is, of course, to keep it subtle so it doesn't look fake or manufactured, but also keep it just fast enough to where you notice it with your eyes and it gives it a nice bit of movement. And having that room on the sides gives you the room you need to kind of move it back and forth without getting black lines on the side. The second one is a little bit more work, but it ended up giving me a nice kind of handheld feel to it. If I were to go back, I'd probably adjust these a little bit so it wasn't quite as jittery, but I still think it got the point across and it didn't distract too much. So what I did for these was, after I'd shot everything, I filmed everything, put everything in my timeline, I picked out the shots that I wanted to look handheld, as if I actually did have somebody there helping me. And then all I did was I went outside and just held my camera and got a few seconds of just holding the camera and pointing it at something. Just sitting there, holding it for about 5-10 seconds, making sure it's the same frame rate, everything like that. I imported them into my timeline, and so those clips have that handheld movement, whereas everything I shot in here does not. So then all you do is take one of those clips, you're gonna overlap it with the clip you want movement, and then you're gonna nest those 2 clips. So once they're nested, make sure the movement clip you got is on top, and then you're gonna apply a warp stabilizer to the actual nest. Once that is applied, you're gonna go in and delete the clip with movement. Now, if you go back in your regular timeline, you're going to notice that the movement from the clip you deleted has now been applied to the non-movement clip because of the warp stabilizer effect. So it's a cool little trick, cool little workaround in order to be able to make it feel like you have some handheld movement, even if you didn't actually have somebody there to hold it for you and kind of give that movement. Obviously, another great way would be to use a slider if you had one motorized and everything, but that doesn't really fit into the budget framework of this. But so that was a quick little trick I used to kind of give this a little bit more life and make it a little bit more engaging. So if you're looking for any of the gear I used for this short film, I will link it all in the description below. Just a heads up, these are affiliate links, so they help me make these videos, but they will show you exactly the kit that I used to shoot this film, as well as some upgraded items you can do to make it a little bit easier on yourself if it's just you shooting. So that's gonna wrap it up. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions about any of the gear used or any specific shots or anything like that, feel free to leave that in the comments below and I will do my best to get back to you and answer those. But for now, that is gonna wrap this one up and I will see you in the next video.